Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Did you know you can advertise on podcasts?
Don't act like you're not impressed.
Find out more at podvertise.com.au. That's podvertise with an s.com.au.
Your organisation runs training courses for your staff and customers. Only problem is it's time-consuming, inconvenient and costly. Take a leaf out of our book. The School of Hard Knock Knocks uses the online training platform by YZ, and our team and customers love it. It's simple to use, supports every media format, audio, video, text, and looks great on desktops, tablets and mobiles. And for a limited time, quote SHKK when you arrange a demo and get 10% off your first year's plan. YZ helps us deliver comedy courses around the world. Imagine what it could do for your organisation. YZ, that's WYZED.com. YZ, online learning made simple.
You're listening to the School of Hard Knock Knocks podcast with me, Steve Davis.
Ladies and gentlemen, your next comedian.
Shouldn't drink on an empty head, you know that, don't you?
That is the shittiest heckle I have ever heard in my life.
Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
What's a bucket list?
You have dangerously underprepared yourself for the shit that is about to get real.
6.5 million people a month consume the Chaser's content. That's some seriously sought-after satire. In this School of Hard Knock Knocks podcast episode, host and Chaser fanboy Steve Davis chats with the Chaser's Charles Firth about creating headlines and the editorial process, adopting your enemy's voice, and how AI is developing a sense of humour. If you like ruffling feathers, taking the piss, and dystopian fairy tales, then you'll love this interview with Charles Firth.
Charles Firth, welcome to the School of Hard Knock Knocks podcast.
Hello, Steve.
Now, I need to start with something that I fear will risk you hanging up and leaving the call, but I've got to get it off my chest.
Wow, okay.
Okay, here we go.
It's a bit worrying.
It's probably strategically the worst part of the interview to do this. But here's the thing. I have been a welded-on, glued-on fan of everything you and the Chaser team have done from year dot. When you've got into the crap, you know, the APEC thing, the Make-A-Wish song, all that sort of stuff, I was with you. I had a guttural sense of loyalty. And this week, in the lead-up to this chat, I thought, you know what? What's the difference between me and my fandom for you and Trump voters and their fandom for Trump? It seemed a similar dynamic of, there's someone who's poking fun at the elite and...
You're right.
Can you expand? Like, how does that hit you?
I am Donald Trump. That's it. And I should set up my own political party and become a megalomaniacal leader of Australia. That's a great idea. I should get Mark Latham on board too.
Oh, yeah, you need a level head around you, don't you?
Well, it's funny because I have been considering setting up my own TV network. So it'd be something like put Australia Firth would be our slogan, and Firth TV.
Let's dive into some of the foundations here, because you studied political science, you wrote for a uni newspaper, you love satire, that's really clear. Was there some experience at uni that helped you with writing comedy for the Chaser, and can you remember what was the thing that made you bend truth to shed light on the truth? Where did that come from?
Well, it was actually much earlier than uni, because actually Chaz, Dom and I all went to the same school, and we took over the school newspaper magazine thing called Tiger Magazine, and we ended up printing these huge editions because it was quite popular. So we'd print 60-page editions of this magazine and get everyone to contribute. And that's where, and we would poke fun at students and and teachers, and it was all very self-indulgent, I'm sure, but it was very funny. But it was sort of like using satire for good, and then the whole thing was that we'd get the front office to photocopy the editions, right? But and it would be sold for 20 cents to the students, and we'd print like 500 copies. They'd sell out in a single morning, and so we just went, oh, this is the future. This is how you make money, is by and the front office hated it because we'd get, all their paper would go. It was it made no economic sense because like a 60-page document does not cost 20 cents.
60 pages.
I know, it was just, but so that was the foundation stone. And so when I got to university, it was like, okay, I want to do that same thing, but with our uni paper. And that's what we did. So it was at Sydney University, and there the student paper is called On Histoire. And I arrived with the singular mission of taking over that newspaper. So in second year, ran for it at the end of first year, got in, and we turned it into, essentially, it looked like The Chaser for a year. So it was all satirical headlines and just taking the piss. I loved tabloids. That was my and we'd take the piss out of all the university administrators. Our favourite edition was, and it got everyone offside. I got called into the Vice Chancellor's office. So, it wasn't the Vice Chancellor's office. It was the Deputy Vice Chancellor's office.
Yeah.
Because Don McNichol was the Vice Chancellor at the time, and he'd announced that he was going to retire. And he, the Vice Chancellors, they take all the money, and his whole legacy had been the first decision he'd made at Sydney University when he'd arrived years before was to get rid of all the disabled ramps around the main quad because they looked a bit ugly. It was a real piece of work. So we just had the headline, "Fuck off, Don." Right, it was very sort of Chaser style, just sort of thing, and put it all around the thing, and we got into so much trouble for that. So
why?
No, exactly, because as far as I was aware, a lot of academics, especially the disabled academic staff, really sided with us. But I was told in no uncertain terms that it's fine to sort of ruffle feathers, but the SRC requires consent from the university to keep operating, and essentially I got threatened with being chucked out of my course. So,
but was there a thinking process of self-editing before that headline was used? Did you understand the consequences, or do you just get this rush of blood and righteousness almost to go forth with something like that?
No, we have huge arguments about most of the controversial headlines.
Yep.
There's a real process, and there's arguments, and there's arguments about exact wording of these things, and then probably we would have had several iterations. It would have been "fuck you, Don," "fuck off, Don," "Don is a fuckwit," So no, there's intention there, and I think that's part of the fun. I've been in meetings. There was one where chairs got thrown over the wording of where to put an adverb, which was, remember when the Queen Mum died, and she was about, I think she was 103 or something like that, and Chris Taylor had suggested that we run a headline about a life cut tragically short, right? And great headline, but we couldn't work out whether to make it a life tragically cut short or a life cut tragically short. There's sort of slightly different meanings. And my God, we had a big argument about that. Chairs were thrown. It was amazing. About the position of an adverb. So.
All over split infinitives, splitting hairs.
Yeah. Exactly.
But there is something about uncovering truth, because if I can take you back to 2001, the election chaser, which coincided with the Tampa affair, the child overboard affair, you were the first to call out the Howard government on that 6 months before the Senate inquiry proved you right. is there some gift of X-ray vision that you have as satirist, or did everyone know that, but no one have the guts to say it, and satire gave you cover?
Well, I think that is fascinating, and thank you, Steve, for acknowledging that, because it is true. Like, we were literally the only people who, before the election, sort of went, wait a minute, this whole children overboard thing is a bit whiffy, and we actually said it on the Election Chaser show. I think you're right. The satirical thing meant we weren't taken seriously, so we were able to say more about what was actually going on. But it also, I think it was a real low point in Australian political commentary and journalism, in that they were so bound up in this idea that you had to sort of have, that you couldn't, like, there was an objective truth. And Howard so disturbed that by just so flagrant, and Reith so flagrantly just lied, just literally cropped photos to make it look like refugees were throwing their kids in the ocean. It didn't even make any sense, right? But the media was so unprepared for that they had no. I would like to think that nowadays they're slightly more wary about. You're looking cynical about that.
Yes.
No, but I do think that there has been an evolution from that. There is more sort of commentary out there, especially because of social media. But this was before social media. And I think you're right. I think there was a sort of, you're allowed to say the truthful things, whereas the rules of journalism, especially back then, was sort of, I don't know what it was, he said, she said, wasn't it?
Well, that's an interesting point about you. Would they be more wary now? Because I'm reminded, I'm a Leonard Cohen tragic. People know that. And he's got a great line, says, every heart to love will come, but like a refugee. And if you think of America's media in this presidential election, it's taken the shredding of its reputation to these last days when the Trump administration are more blatantly than ever lying about rorting, to actually have networks, including Fox News, just stop it. Yes. But it's taken a long time. I think that's what you're suggesting you'd think they'd be at, but
well, I think what's interesting is the American networks have done that. I wouldn't underestimate that that's just a top-down decision that Murdoch's decided, the wind is changing, I'll abandon Trump, and that Fox News could very well have decided to just keep pumping up Trump if, it had suited Murdoch's commercial interests. So let's not get too sort of thing. I got added to this WhatsApp group during the US election, sort of, in the hours leading up to the count and everything. Yeah. And it was all these journos, both Australian journos and foreign correspondents over in the US. And I just saw it was so interesting. They sort of have this sort of face of balance and propriety and objectivity. And then in the WhatsApp group, you just go, I could ruin everyone's career. There is a total, they're just not in sync with their own sort of thing. And one of my missions actually in publishing in the next sort of 10 or 15 years is to actually loosen up that and actually get people to be more, where their personal values line up, to be more in tune with their public faces.
If you don't mind, we'll put a link in our show notes to the transcript of that WhatsApp group.
Yes, that's right, exactly.
I wish we could get to that, because I lived in Hungary for a little while. I had 4 major newspapers when I was there in the early 90s, but each one was clearly, a bit like the networks in America, they knew this was the communist one. They knew this was the right. And there's a refreshingness about that, because you can read it in context.
Yes, that's right.
And so that little more, that one-to-one honesty, I don't know. It actually leads me to this situation I'm in. I get most of my news from satire channels.
Yes.
BBC4, the News Quiz, the Bugle podcast, Sean McAuliffe here. You guys, for a long time. It scares me, because it shouldn't be that way. And I saw an opinion piece that Cam Smith wrote on The Shot only in the last couple of weeks, and saying that you've actually backed off from going gun-ho on Scott Morrison with a claim that he's going to leave politics and suddenly become a conservationist, because you're acknowledging...
Malcolm Turnbull.
Oh, so yes, because when you're in power, you've got to yield to Murdoch, otherwise you won't survive. That opinion piece is almost like a grown-up aspect of satire now. There would have been discussions behind the scenes in being forthright by that. You're really seeing the responsibility you're carrying now is what the Fourth Estate was meant to have for so long.
It's true. Well, it is true. I mean, we reach an enormous number of people. Like our monthly figures, we reach sort of 6.5 million people a month through our web assets.
Yes, and I saw. Sorry, you mentioned on your podcast just recently. You're the second most read news source in Australia.
Yeah, on one Sunday we were, but we're constantly. I mean, you did a serious. If we actually had the money to pay Nielsen to do the web rankings, which is you only get included if you stump up the cash as sort of a blackmail system. We would probably be a sort of 14th or 15th biggest website in Australia, which is sort of amazing. And that's great. But yes, you're right. With great power comes great responsibility. And I think we are trying to be a little bit more thoughtful. I think Jon Stewart, I'm not putting myself in the same category as Jon Stewart, but Jon Stewart has certainly talked about that same thing, which is there are subtleties and actually good satire should recognise those subtleties in how, but because with Cam's thing, it was a very successful. It started as a tweet, which was just basically pointing out that Malcolm Turnbull had miraculously regrown a spine about climate change the moment he left politics. But then, it was this whole thing of, if you're not aware of the humanity, like we shouldn't be out there criticising people who come on board and get with the climate challenge. Like that is a sort of existential threat to everyone. Let's not prioritise the gag over climate change. It's just too important. So.
Wow. So when do you choose to prioritise the gag? I suppose when the stakes are lower. When the stakes are...
I think what's important is to know that our license to comment on anything is because we're funny, right? Like otherwise we would just be boring white men who really deserve no, public space at all. But actually by applying craft and entertainment values and stuff like that to real events, that is when we if we're not funny, we relinquish that license. So that doesn't mean that everything has to be a gag. It's just that every time you comment, you have to be funny.
Yes, because it's a beautiful challenge. I'm a former journo too, so I really appreciate that balance of having the funny, which is your license to be have our attention, but to have the truth at some sort of truthful observation. Like, for example, in your current annual, we'll talk about that in a moment, there's a lovely story about Scott Morrison bringing a lump of coronavirus into Parliament. I mean, it's a little device of terror that is politically beautiful for him. So it's a fine line. Is it the harder end of comedy to be in, perhaps, satire, and make it work? Because there's a lot of wannabe and also rans, as well as people like the Shovel, who are trying to do what you do. Where would you put it if you had to have a hierarchy of comedy? Where would you put satire?
Oh, that's a very good question. I for a long time didn't even think of it as comedy. I sort of think of it as distinct from that, in that its purpose is slightly different. It's to expose truths and undermine power structures and things like that with entertainment as its delivery vehicle. Like the way our editor, who is also a graphic designer, he actually designed the Chaser logo back 20 years ago. But the way he puts it is, we construct an entire ICBM, like an intercontinental ballistic missile of comedy, and but an ICBM is nothing without the payload, and the payload is this small thing, this small little bomb, truth bomb, that sits at the front of it, and that's the whole operation, and I think that's very true. And so, but I sort of now admit that part of that is, yes, of course, you can define it as comedy. I suppose what I'd say is there's a few principles of satire that you've got to get right for it to work at a sort of technical level. And some comedians just don't really get that or haven't thought enough through, because look at the best comedians that are coming through, the best satirists that are coming through in their 20s at the moment. People like Victoria Zerbst and Jenna Owen on SBS and Mark Humphries on 7:30, and they all are willing to place themselves in the position of being a baddie, playing the baddie characters. The obnoxious PR women who are just horrible, or Mark Humphries will often play some sort of horrible Liberal Party minister who's incredibly corrupt or whatever, and too often I think there's a conflation amongst a lot of comedians where if you're sort of saying obnoxious things, which these people are, then suddenly that reflects badly on you, and there's not a distinction between the text of a character and the text of what you actually believe. And it's a very simple sort of thing, but I think that means that because when you read it off the page, those sketches look very confronting, you're saying a whole lot of racist, sexist, horrible things. People don't want to write those things. They don't want to create that sort of stuff. And good satire is all about, placing yourself in your enemy's shoes and adopting the voice of them to evoke how terrible they are. So I think, in some ways it's sort of easier once you get it, but yeah, there's a few sort of technical aspects to satire that you've really got to nail before you start building on it.
So some of the misogynistic, sexist stuff, other comics could just do straight. But
yes, they just do straight. They just be sexist.
Yes, but a satirist does it in the context of a character, which brings it, I guess, different meaning. Is that the sort of principle you're trying to?
Yeah, and I reckon in our heyday, like with War on Everything, often, we had such a broad audience, and people would go, "Oh, I love the Chaser. They're so politically incorrect. They just say all these sexist, things or racist things, But it was all done within this sort of context of being able to say those things because, the actual target of sketches and the target of the comedy was the obnoxious people.
So you get both lots of followers don't you?
Hey?
Yeah. That could be your legacy. Hey, you work with some great people. Is it a team-based writing environment with the Chaser or format, or do you all go solo and then come back and clash ideas together?
Well, it's evolved over the years. It was very much in the early days. We tended to break off into pairs, but very team-based in terms of bringing everything back to a table and reading through at the table. And it's funny, I'm doing a similar process now we're doing, for the Chaser websites, we're doing this War on 2020 series. And I've introduced a whole new generation of comedians to that process of, I think there's been a little bit of pushback. It's like, oh, no, I tend to write my own things. Like, not here, you don't. Like, you can write your first draft, but we'll farm it out to somebody else for edits, and then we'll read it at the table. And one of the good things I think people have learned is that actually, if you treat scripts like that, then you're treating them more, sure, you've created them, but they're these sort of objects that you put out into the world, and they're there for everyone to improve upon. And it means it takes the personalness out of the creative process, so you can just literally focus on what's best for the script, and watch it. And that's why the table is so important, because it actually means that people get to hear, the edits getting good laughs, and so they still have ownership over the script as a whole, but they sort of go, oh, right, okay, this is actually improved with these edits, stuff like that. So it's good. And I think that's true even on our website. Like, we have an editorial process where, somebody will write the article, but then it'll be heavily edited before it goes out.
Okay. So an ideal teammate for you then, let's say everyone left you and you had to start again. What's on your job description? What sort of personality do you need to surround yourself with to come up with the goods and to keep you honest and be your muse and all that sort of stuff?
Well, his name's Cam Smith, and he's currently the editor of The Chaser. No, I mean, he's just brilliant. One of the things I love about him is he shuts up and lets me take all the podcast interviews and limelight. But also he's a bit of a computer nerd. So, like one of the things we've been experimenting with this year is using AI a lot, not just for the Photoshop jobs. Like on the cover of the Chaser Annual, you know how Trump is drinking bleach?
Yes.
Great image, right? And it looks really convincing. And that's because Cam applied all these AI engines, or like he taught this AI engine how to, do photos for him. So instead of it being a Photoshop job, it's I want an image of Trump drinking some bleach. And that's what the bloody AI came up with. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
And so we've been experimenting. We got this little login a bit on the sly to this OpenAI thing, which is SiliconValley.com. Did you hear? I talked about it on the Chase Report podcast a few weeks ago, where it's called GPT-3 or something,
right?
And it's this new engine. It's not released yet, and you're not supposed to use everything. But we asked it to write a whole lot of Chaser headlines, and it sort of knew. It's absorbed the whole internet, and now it's doing its own AI, and so it knew what to do. And then it wrote us a whole lot of Chaser headlines. You're going, oh, fuck, we're about to be replaced. But it's that sort of discovery, like the fact that Cam can sort of bring in this whole nerdy technological angle to the whole operation is such a wonderful thing.
So who wrote the headline on the front of the Annual, Iraqi forces launch invasion to bring democracy to America? Was that you or AI?
That is an old headline. That is literally like I think that was 2003 that headline was written. It probably I don't know who wrote that headline, but it was probably someone like Craig. Yep. Like it was on the front cover, and then Cam noticed it the other day. It could have been James Edwards. I don't know who wrote it. But then Cam noticed it the other day and went, oh, my God, that totally applies now as well. And, well, there you go. So, that's just rehashing it. That's the sort of value you get out of Cam.
Exactly. And look, let's just talk about the Annual because I'd love people to go out and buy it. I've been sent an advanced copy to have a look at, and it's hilarious. I mean, another headline, laxatives sell out as hoarders try to deal with excess toilet paper.
That's right.
This is landing one home. I was going to ask you about the challenge of writing something for an Annual, for a magazine, Women's Day style, that you pick up at a newsagent and you buy, is different to the stuff you can throw out on web series and online. What's the different approach? Is there a difference, firstly, or is it just the medium and the message is still the same?
Yeah, no, I think it is the same because the wonderful thing is that it's been we've literally had a decade's worth of material in the last 6 months to work with. So it's not like you're sort of going, oh, what should we talk about this year? Although we did have that conversation in August. We're going, what should we talk about in the annual? And James Schleffel, who's the shovel editor, was going, I don't know, but have you heard about this pandemic thing? Maybe we should mention that. I was like, no, I haven't heard of it. Yeah, what's that about? But so I think, one of the interesting things is there's sort of different filters of comedy that you can sort of work with. And what we found looking at, especially that lockdown and in that early stage of the pandemic, the panic buying and stuff like that, was that observational comedy as a filter was the thing that worked best. And that then didn't hold, and people wanted to get angry about, the world and the leaders and blah, blah, blah. But there was this sort of month there where, it was actually people were very focused on themselves, and the pieces that went best were the little slice of life things, the, 1 o'clock suddenly becomes 2 p.m., and those sorts of things. So I think part of it is being in control of the different filters to sort of be able to be aware of where your audience is at.
Do you think the annual, this story, Centrelink to invest in second phone, now,
Thank you.
I would hope that gets talked about in some sort of committee or room inside Centrelink going, what, we've just been called out. We really are we've got to... Is that a pipe dream to think that this...
Well, it must have been seen by them, because I wrote that article literally, it was about 4 or 5 days into... What's the word? Job seeker. Remember they increased job seeker, but you had to ring up and say, yes, I'm unemployed, immediately. And so people were spending all day on the phone. And for all of my friends, because they're all in the arts, they were completely devastated. And they're just spending, and so that article went absolutely crazy. So it is completely true that it must have gone around Canberra, and so I think there is a sort of public role there, even though it's very silly. The one thing I would say is it's very hard to know what's happening when your articles go viral in Canberra, though, because everyone's got ad blockers on. So you can get quite good analytics. A lot of people have ad blockers, but you can get quite good analytics and get a sense of, where things are coming from. But in Canberra, it's like you get a location. Yes, it's coming out of, there's lots of traffic coming out of Canberra, but there's no other detail that you can get. It's really interesting how... it's sort of lucky in a way.
Well, the savvy audiences know how to cover their tracks.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah.
Now, I've gone over time. I've got 2 last questions, if you don't mind.
Yes. Okay.
One of them is and I'd also like you to tease out this web series, War on 2020. In fact, let's just start with that. When will we see it? What should entice people to have a look? It's December when it's...
Well, I don't think you're going to be able to avoid it.
Okay.
It'll just be pushed in front of you through social media. But no, so we'll start dropping War on 2020 sketches at the beginning of December.
Yep.
And the idea is we're going to spend a month taking the piss out of 2020 as a sort of catharsis on behalf of the whole of the world, in a way. But then we've got 2 special events, sort of live shows. We usually tour around the country, but obviously can't do that this year. So we're having 2 live events where everyone's turning up live, and it'll be like a massive mega Zoom call with 1,000 people on it or whatever.
Like Hillsong for comedy.
Hillsong for comedy. Mm-hmm. You can buy tickets at the Chaser website, chaser.com.au/live, and that's on the 11th and 12th of December, so the Friday and the Saturday night. And I think, and so what we'll do is we'll sort of do some live stuff and talk to the audience and take the piss out of the audience, which is always really fun. Like, I actually really enjoy the Zoom the live Zoom events has been this wonderful new innovation, and then play in a whole lot of the sketches and stunts and stuff that we've been doing.
Yep.
So it'll be pretty. I mean, I think people will you'll see it on your Facebook feed or your Twitter or wherever you hang out, but I am looking forward to those live events. I think they'll be quite special.
Yeah, indeed. Now, fatherhood, like any good father, I'm sure you've read fairy tales to your kids. You snapped at one point and you came up with Fractured Fairy Tales.
Nice.
What was it about Pied Piper that particularly influenced you to take them on?
The reason why I wrote that book was because I wanted to my 9-year-old son loves reading the same books over and over again. I'm sure we all have that sort of thing, but there was no gap in the market for like the fairy tales, because we read those traditional fairy tales, including the Pied Piper, which is a horrible story, which is, like he leads all the kids. And then in the sort of saccharine sanitized version, what happens? Then they all turn up later. But in the real version of the fairy tale, all the kids go missing and that's it.
Yeah.
Because they don't pay him back, for the work he did. So he just kills all the kids. And it's sort of like you need that sort of realism in your fairy tales because you need to be entertained as you're reading to your kids. So it was that was the idea. But I can't actually remember what the allegory was for Pied Piper that I suppose in some ways what I'm doing with Fractured Fairy Tales is taking fairy tales back to what they should be, which is awful, awful, horrible stories which don't have happy endings and leave your kid thinking about the world as they're going to sleep. As we used to, I'm sure as kids, I used to love dystopian novels and like really dark stuff and all this sort of bloody saccharine piece of shit. Oh, the kids came back. Oh, fuck that. No.
Well, I'm keeping the spirit alive. I took my girls to see Into the Woods the other day, which is the Stephen Sondheim fairy tale where by the end almost everyone gets killed, including the narrator, gets sent in front of the giant and sacrificed. So that was my little dose of realism for them. So,
well, you're a good parent.
So this is the very last question. This is it. And it ties up with where the world is at the moment because it links the work you guys did in America years ago with where we are now. You went over there, you convinced Americans at the Eiffel Tower, Leaning Tower of Pisa, Taj Mahal were all in Australia, and the Chaser team walking around with sex offender on a T-shirt or bag snatcher. How satisfying was that to watch their reactions? And do you think America's gotten smarter? Could that actually work anymore?
Oh, I think it definitely could. I mean, I think Borat basically copied us in a way, the whole dumb Americans thing. Nobody had thought of that before us. No, but I mean, that Australian tourism one that you mentioned, we shot mostly in South Carolina. And that was like shooting fish in a barrel. Like that was extraordinary. That was one of the most satisfying days I've ever had filming because we basically used every person we interviewed. We only interviewed about 7 people and they'd all never – and we sort of actually that night we had this really serious discussion about how actually it's really sad that these people, like we were bumming into people going, oh, yeah, I'd love to see the beach. And you're going, you're 100 miles from the beach. You could literally just drive to the beach. And, and like, oh, yeah, and middle-aged people are going, oh, yeah, I'd love to catch a plane. I've never caught a plane. So it's just a whole different, people were, people, get born, grow up and die in the same town in America, especially in the Deep South. It's quite sort of, you sort of realise the extent of, it's a very different society down there to anything really we have in Australia. But then the other, that sex offender one, the one in Delaware, so that was where in Delaware, they have this law where if you get convicted of certain crimes like sex offender or drug dealer, you then have to wear a T-shirt as part, that you are one as part of the punishment. And so I went around with various sort of T-shirts, and that was a horrible experience because I got spat on, when I had the sex, because people thought that I was being punished for being the best one was handbag snatcher. Did you remember that one? I had the handbag snatcher, and then I was outside a supermarket offering, "Can I help you with your bags?"
But here's the intriguing thing for us people who were cheering you on from the couch. That's mano a mano. You're face to face with a person with their real emotions. How often do they know they're being made fun of? Because that gives the risk of them wanting to retaliate violently, some of them. What happens? That, to me, that takes guts.
Yeah. No, there's no... it's usually there's no awareness because actually, especially when there's a camera around, they're sort of in headlights. It's so, they're not necessarily thinking straight. So they're in the moment. They're going, oh, here's a sex offender, here's a thing. It's very rare that they get a sense that you're just taking the piss out of them. One of the ones was the Westboro Baptist Church, Fred Phelps, who's a complete homophobe. I went and tried to chat him up, and I got really far. Like I started touching his ass and running my hands through his hair and just saying, "Oh my God, you're so chiseled! Like, wow, it's a good-looking guy." Before he sort of realised that I was taking the piss, it was extraordinary. It was like a minute before he even clocked there. So, yeah, but and then when they do clock that you're taking the piss out of them, you just run away. I mean, in that circumstance, we were lucky. The police were there, and they at one point where it was clear that Fred Phelps was just going to punch me in the face.
Yeah, the
police just dragged me out and said, "Sorry, we're we're protecting you. We're getting rid of you for your own good," and made us stand.
Look, at one level, he's got a right to do that because you really...
Yes, I know, yes.
Just like when the journos ring businesses who are under pressure and try to get the truth for... They're just helping prop up their proprietor. That's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Mind you, I think Westboro Baptist Church, I think you can pretty much... Especially if you're Fred Phelps.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to go on his side.
Yeah.
I already went on to the Trump thing earlier on in this interview. Yeah. But that does bring us to the end of this chat. I'm really looking forward to the War on 2020 and the annual I highly recommend. That's available where all good trashy magazines are sold?
Yes, it's in all bookstores. It's not in newsagents this year because... who goes to newsagents anymore? But every bookstore, and you can go to chasershop.com and get a copy there.
Beautiful. Charles Firth, thanks for all the work you and your people have done over the years, and thanks for having a chat.
And thanks, Steve. That was a wonderful chat. I really enjoyed it.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.